Hello everyone, welcome to the Zenger Folkman webinar series. I am Jared Harding, VP of Marketing at Zenger Folkman. But more importantly, I have sitting across from me the man, the myth, the legend, Dr. Jack Zenger. And Jack, today we're going to be discussing leadership speed. And you recently wrote a book on this topic. Why do you think this is such a relevant idea for today's leader?
Jared, I think there are two main kind of forces. One is that the world is moving at a faster pace, it seems to me, and the nature of work is changing, and the combination of those two has really set the stage for us exploring this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we dive into that topic, I want to give those of you who aren't as familiar with Zenger Folkman an opportunity to kind of understand us better and why our clients love working with us. So we know from our research and analysis of what is now over 1 million assessments on leaders from around the globe, that not all leadership behaviors are created equal. Some simply have more of an impact and make more of a difference than others. And we kind of have this relentless pursuit going on to identify those kind of characteristics and leadership behaviors that separate high-performing leaders from everybody else. And we really believe that there's a value in providing individuals insights, but within this context of what it takes to be a great leader, what the best leaders do. And Jack, you and I actually were talking about this yesterday, kind of this combination of providing individual insights and this path of what extraordinary looks like. Why do you think this approach is so valuable?
I think what is so valuable about this is that by giving people information and giving them greater self-awareness, you're able to put them in the driver's seat. You're able to have them take charge of their own development. And it seems to me that the world is moving in that direction, that people want to have more autonomy and control over their life. And that this is what we're trying to do, is to kind of really help people feel that sense of ownership and that the locus of control is with them.
So now just a couple polls to kind of start to set up our topic for today. This first one, the tools and technology I have at my disposal create. Do they create more efficiency and less work? Your second option, do they create more work and less efficiency? Or final option, do they create more work and more efficiency? So go ahead, and we see people weighing in here. And Jack, what do we mostly see when we ask people this question?
I think they gravitate toward the third option, that what's happening is the technology is giving us more efficiency, but there's more work to be done.
That's right. We don't make it easier on ourselves. We just continue to add more to the pile.
We have not.
All right, so thank you again. We're able to see how the audience is weighing in here and seems to be in that trend. Second question that we'd like to ask your participation on is, I feel that I am often expected to move fast and do more. Do you agree? Disagree? Are you neutral around that statement? And specifically when we're thinking about your work environment, do you have this expectation to move faster and do more? Again, Jack, what do we typically see when we ask people this question?
Well, I think there's a pretty wide consensus that people are being expected to move faster and to do more. And we've seen that all around the globe and every different industry that we've touched so far. So it's pretty consistent. It's not unique.
Now, for all of you that agree with that statement, and we've got a few that disagree, I bet we're all wondering what kind of job do they have and how do we get that job? Okay, so we're now going to transition in to this idea that Jack has already been alluding to about work and how it's changing today. Jack, take us through this.
Well, I was just, I was musing about my own life. So 50 years ago, I had my first sort of serious executive position. And I was thinking about what life was like then. So picture this. You come in the morning around 8 or so. Your secretary has a stack of letters that she's received the prior day. So she's opened them up, and they're in a stack for you, and you proceed to read through them. and then you proceed to kind of think about what you want to reply. And so you dictate into a little microcassette recorder the responding letter to them. She takes that, and in this case it was a she, and that's what it was in most cases, unfortunately. But anyway, she takes this, she transcribes it, brings it back to you, you read through it, you make some corrections and changes. She goes back and retypes it again into a letter. She brings it back into you to sign, and then early in the afternoon, they get put in an envelope and they get mailed off in the mail. And I would say on average, I had maybe 7 to 10 of those per day. And as you see on this chart on the screen, there's this, the number of communications that an executive receives per year. Back in the 1970s, which is what I'm talking about, you can see that it was maybe 1,000 messages a year. Now, fast forward to today's world. I've asked this question in 2 or 3 groups, and I bet if we asked our group that's on the call today, the number would be, how many emails do you get daily? A lot of people said 100, 200. One person in a group recently said he got 400 emails.
Wow.
Now, I appreciate that's an aberration. But I think I get, on average, maybe 100 to 120 emails during a day. So clearly the amount of communication, the amount of messages that people receive has just transformed dramatically. It's fascinating that the eminent economist John Maynard Keynes back in the 1930s, so this is about the year I was born, this is just a little before I was born, John Maynard Keynes kind of says to the world that his prediction was that he could see that his grandchildren would be working a 3-hour day. He was a brilliant guy, by the way. How are you enjoying that?
Oh, I love my 3-hour days.
And so, obviously we just completely misread what would happen going forward. And obviously, if anything is happening, people are working longer hours. The average workday is like 9 hours now. The average executive does not take a lot of time off. It's a very, very different world in terms of its demands, its pace.
So the pace has changed, and so one of the things that we would like to do is give you an opportunity to measure your personal pace. And this little survey that we have set up will kind of give you some of those individual insights as we dig a little deeper into what leadership speed is. Okay, so this personal pace survey, what it does is it really measures your preferences across 3 scales that are related to leadership speed. And so because it's an indicator of your preference, there are no wrong answers. So you don't have to overthink it. There's not positive points and negative points. It's just simply what is the response that you are most likely to do. As you look at those, and maybe there are 2 good things, and maybe you're likely to do both, but we're going to force you to choose which one are you most likely to do. Which one would you most prefer? All right, so we're going to jump in. Don't overthink it. We're going to go relatively quickly through these and then start to compile those results.
Okay, this brings us to the big question for today, which is what is leadership speed? Now, the most common definition of speed we know is that people think of it as being moving quickly, acting quickly. But the question is, does simply moving faster make leaders truly more effective? To do this analysis, we began to look at data that we had about people's preference for doing things fast or doing things right. And what we found out was this. What is more important, doing things fast, doing things right? We looked at people who were in the top quartile when it came to doing things fast, and we've called that kind of a strength. So doing things fast, strength, but people were not in the top quartile when it came to being focused on doing things right. What's the chances of that person who is really focused on fast, but not focused on doing things right? What's the chances of him or her being one of your truly extraordinary leaders? And the answer is 2%. Now let's flip this kind of backwards and kind of go the other direction. What if you find someone who is not in the top quartile when it comes to doing things fast, but they are in the top quartile in being focused on doing things right? So I might ask you, so what's the chances of that person being one of your truly extraordinary leaders in an organization? And a number of you might be thinking to yourself, well, it's probably, maybe it's a little bit more. Well, it's 50% more. It goes all the way from 2 to 3%. It's a huge jump. Now, seriously, what we found is that those two are roughly the same. But the dramatic thing that our data kind of revealed was when you found someone who was in the top quartile on both doing things and preferring to do things right and also to doing things fast, that you saw that you don't just add those two things together, obviously. You have this dramatic jump to the 96th percentile. Now, it's true that when you combine any two competencies and you find people who are good at both, that the number will be higher. But it's really remarkable to see this kind of a jump between being good at one and being good at the two. What this has led us to is to say, our definition of leadership speed is a leader's ability to execute quickly, but correctly. It's really interesting that this quality of speed is not one where simply acting fast by itself gets you there. It has to be combined with a focus on high quality. Having said that, what's fascinating to me, I think, is that those two qualities are not cut from the same piece of cloth. That is, I'm thinking about touring an automotive manufacturing plant some time ago. I was watching them stamp out fenders and door panels. And obviously they had to be sure that the panel had the right curvature, that it was the right dimension, that it would fit into the area where it was supposed to. But as long as it met those specifications, if you kept pushing further on the finish, is it perfectly sanded? Are there any little blemishes on the surface? That didn't make it much of a difference because they knew it was going to be painted and treated in a number of other ways. But in that same automotive manufacturing company, in years gone by, it had taken them 4 days to make the change from one mold to another to stamp out one different fender versus another. They had gotten that down to a matter of 8 minutes. So the opportunity to improve the speed seemed like it was almost limitless. And so we are going to kind of present to you this idea that yes, both quality and speed are vital. What's wonderful about the speed side of that, though, is it seems to have a lot more opportunity for improvement and gain. And so for the next few minutes, let's just talk about the impact of what we have defined as leadership speed on you personally, on the team that you manage or that you're involved with, and on the organization more broadly. Let's just talk a little bit about the impact on individuals. So our data has, shows some interesting kind of conclusions. If you look at those people who were below the 75th percentile and compare them to those who were in the top quartile, above the 75th percentile, and you look at their overall leadership effectiveness scores. Now, as Jared mentioned earlier, we collect 360-degree feedback data. In looking at that data, you can combine everyone's scores into an aggregate number, which we call their overall leadership effectiveness. So what you're seeing here is a person who is not at the 75th percentile is on that overall leadership effectiveness on average at the 40th percentile. Those who are in the top quartile, however, are 2 times more effective as perceived by their colleagues, they jump to the 83rd percentile. So the impact on an individual, the fact that he or she is perceived as preferring to move fast makes a big difference in how they're seen. It impacts the way they're evaluated, their annual performance rating. People who are in the bottom 10 percentile on leadership speed, only 13% of those people would ever receive from their boss the rating of exceed or far exceeds your expected performance. Whereas the top 10 percentile, nearly 3/4, 74% of that group would be rated by their boss as exceeding or far exceeding their performance expectations. The impact on a team is really fascinating. If you look at this now kind of decile by decile, if you look at employee engagement, so these are the people who report to this leader and work with him or her. If your overall leadership speed is down in that bottom decile, what you see is that in terms of how your employees describe themselves and their level of engagement and commitment to the company, they're at the 41st percentile. And then you see it steadily kind of climbing, levels off a little bit in the middle there, but then it goes all the way up to the 83rd percentile. Now, this is the subordinates of the individual. So the speed really does seem to impact not only you personally, but on the people with whom you're working. The impact on the organization, we think, is fascinating too, because if you look at the question of to what degree are people highly committed, you see that those people with the lowest speed percentile, those people on that extreme left-hand side, the bottom 10%, their overall percent of highly committed employees working for them, 16%. But the more their speed score goes up to the next 25 percentile scores, then the middle, then the next 25%, you see again, it jumps dramatically from the bottom to the top. So productivity appears to be impacted quite dramatically by this quality of leadership speed. So I guess the key takeaway that I come away with from that quick review of our data is that leadership speed, the way we've described it, has a big impact on you personally, upon the team that you manage, and on the organization. It does impact, the team's overall engagement. Organizational speed is a key strategic differentiator. And I think this now brings us, Jared, to having the opportunity to share with people what their scores now mean.
Now that you know how much of an impact leadership speed can have, I'm sure you're anxious to see some of your personal PACE results. So check your email. The subject line will read your personal PACE survey results. And then you can go ahead and open up that PDF and you'll be able to see your scores across these three scales. So we have a scale, it's kind of the overall pace scale, which is, do you prefer a slower pace or do you prefer a faster pace? We also have a quality versus quantity scale. So this is your preference on how much do you seek to have quality in your work or choose quality, and how much would you prefer to have quantity, get more done. And then the last scale is having high patience, your preference for having higher patience versus lower patience. And so as you start to review these scales, what you'll see is that your score is, you have a possible 10, right? That could be either way. And so it's divided up on how you chose to answer some of those. So you may have some, on some of the questions, chose to be on one side of the scale. And so what you're able to see is overall, across the questions that we ask, where do you tend to fall overall on these scales? So you're able to see that. Now, what's important to remember is that these measure your preferences. And so just because maybe you prefer a little bit of a slower pace, or you have more of a quality orientation and you're a very patient person, those of us that are very impatient appreciate patient people in our lives. But that doesn't mean that you're not good at leadership speed. And this will provide you just a little bit of insight into your preferences, and we'll talk about how those preferences can help you determine what are some of the best decisions you can make in improving your leadership speed.
And it won't surprise many people on this in this webinar today that our advice to people is, if you want to know how other people perceive you, a 360-degree feedback process is probably a more accurate way than the self-assessment. But we think this does give you, there is a correlation between your personal assessment of yourself and what others would see in you as well.
All right, so we want to give you a chance to share your reaction to your results with everyone else. And so we've put up a word cloud, and so you can put up a word or an emoji that represents your reaction to your results. And so you can go ahead and enter those in now. So we're seeing some people are surprised. This is what they expected. Some smiley faces. And there is that taco. I made a joke about a taco being a tool to inspire others. In every webinar, we always have someone throw in the taco to the word cloud. All right, so a lot of different reactions to the results. And we have a little bit more data to show you.
Often we will be asked, does it make any difference what my job is? Does it make any difference what organization I'm in or what functional assignment I have? And the data that you're seeing in front of you now shows that a quantity or a quality focus does tend to be somewhat situational.
Now we're looking at levels of management within an organization. And what's interesting here is that we see top management comes in as no surprise. They still have this very high quantity focus represented by the blue bar, but the majority of these people agree that the organization needs to move faster. If you think of your top management, that probably fits that profile very well. What happens as you get a little bit lower into the organization, you see the quantity focus declines a little bit, but the big jump is that supervisors have more of a quality focus, but yet the majority of supervisors still agree that the organization needs to move faster if they're going to be successful. And so that's interesting. They want to have quality, they want to do good work, but they also see a high need for the organization to get moving. This next slide shows, so from an individual point of view, these questions that we've asked, we've kind of done a big aggregate of thousands of people here, and 75% of people agree that they feel, and we asked this question at the beginning, they feel that they're expected to move faster and do more. 60% of the people that we surveyed agree that they are often frustrated that their organization moves too slow and gets stalled. 67% of these people agree that if their organization were to move faster, it would substantially influence success. So it's to the point Jack made a little bit earlier, leadership speed is this combination of executing right and executing fast. But isn't it interesting that of the thousands of people that we've surveyed and that we've asked these questions to, people do see this ability for organizations and people to move fast as a place of growth where they can really make a difference. So our key takeaway from this that we hope that you understand about leadership speed is that it can be a competitive advantage for your organization. We really like this quote here: human beings have never opted for slower. It's always, how do we move faster, get things done faster? And as individuals and as organizations, if we can really nail this formula down, and in this work environment that we live in today, of constant innovation and disruptions, leadership speed can really be an advantage for you personally and for your organization. All right, so now the big question, you've sold me, Jared and Jack. I want to be better. How do I do it? Well, that's what we're going to talk about. And often, our most intuitive way of how we think we may increase our leadership speed may not work, right? So we see talking faster, and we're going to run everywhere and eliminate all the small talk, right? Everything, tell people, well, you should be able to do that in 5 minutes. Joe Folkman, since he's not on this webinar, I can pick on him. That's a classic Joe Folkman statement. But those are things that we think may move us faster, but are these things that actually increase our leadership speed? So how do we do that? How do we increase leadership speed without becoming frantic and annoying and, right, kind of that image of just running around and being crazy? And so what our research has been able to show us is that there are some behaviors, and we call these companion behaviors, that are exhibited by leaders who are very proficient at being able to execute fast and execute right. So these behaviors are very much like Velcro. They're always present in leaders who embody this leadership speed, this idea of leadership speed. And so now we'd like to walk you through some of these companion behaviors and how that may apply to you.
And Jared, if I may, let me just say that we think these are very important insights into how people can improve their leadership speed. We would also want to just maybe insert here that there are some straightforward, observable, pretty obvious things that you can do as well. Leaders can improve the speed of the pace of their meetings. They can improve the pace of their interactions that they have when they drop by somebody's office or when somebody drops by their offices. Their own personal pace.
Can I make an extra plea?
Sure.
Please shorten meetings. Let's make that the cry to the world. Please, let's shorten meetings.
Yeah, the average leader spends 15% of his or her week in a meetings. That's a real valid plea. So this research is fascinating because what we found was that if you saw a leader who got really high scores on leadership speed, what other things did that person do particularly well? And so what we're going to show you now are these 8 behaviors which are kind of glued together with that quality of leadership speed. And the first one is that they are good at having a strategic perspective. Now, there are dozens, maybe hundreds of definitions of what strategy is. It happens that I have a son who teaches strategy at a prominent university, and I like what the research he's done, which is that the most effective strategy is not just a one-time event that a company makes. It's not an organization like Walmart deciding, yes, we're going to serve the medium-sized communities that don't have a big box grocery store or a big box department store. Instead, it's a series of decisions. And so this ability to, as Apple has done, to continually come out with a new product, a new concept, iTunes, with iCloud, their ability to kind of constantly innovate, that's what strategic perspective is all about. The second companion behavior that we identified was this being courageous. An organization's willingness to make a tough decision, even though it may have some difficult financial consequences. And I think recently about Starbucks, and their willingness to close all of their stores for some training on how you deal with people who are racial minorities. That was a courageous decision. Clearly, the kind that gets criticized by Wall Street sometimes, but it's a wonderful companion behavior. The third one is the concept that those people who are effective at leadership speed were also very effective at communicating powerfully. I think recently of Wells Fargo Bank. As most of us know on the call, they've gone through a difficult time. We know them to be some really great people. A policy that had been established for a long time just got overplayed, got out of hand. And so now Wells Fargo is communicating pretty extensively that we're reestablishing ourselves on the old principles on which we were founded. We were launched in this year, but we're kind of relaunching this now to today. And they're owning up to this in a pretty honest, straightforward way. I think they're getting high marks for their communication about their situation. The next companion behavior you'll see here is technical and professional expertise. You know, I happen to spend 35 years living in the Bay Area of California. Some of our neighbors were companies like Hewlett-Packard and Intel and Applied Materials. I got to know the founders of Intel. And what was really remarkable about these three people was that even though they were elevated to very senior executive positions, they never lost their love for and their attention to the technology. And Andy Grove and Gordon Moore and Robert Noyce were always at the forefront of the technology of this organization. The next companion behavior is one that we've called focus externally. There's a life insurance company called Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company that had a practice of inviting a group of clients to come in on an annual basis and do an audit. Not a financial audit, but a customer service audit. How does this organization treat their customers? And they would have this group of some pretty 8 or so prominent clients of theirs write a report with the understanding that it would be published unedited throughout the entire organization. And wow, did that ever keep people focused on, you know, how the external environment was responding to their behavior. Jared, do you want to talk about taking initiative and what you see organizations doing?
So take initiative as a companion behavior reminds me of a psychology class I took. And in that class, it was a freshman class in one of the big auditoriums, you know, so several hundred students. And to get to the auditorium, one of there's two entrances at the top of the auditorium, and one was closest to the entry to enter the building. So most students came in that particular door. And one day, coming to that class, there was a box pretty close to the doorway to get into the auditorium. But it didn't look like garbage. I mean, it was taped up and everything. And, you know, I just kind of walk around the box and go sit down. And so the class starts, and the professor walks up the auditorium and then goes and grabs this box, brings it down, and asks, why did no one move this box? How many hundred of you students walked in, had to walk around the box, saw everybody else walking around the box, but nobody moved the box? And I have no idea the psychology lesson he was trying to teach us, but I remember that because it's like, well, why didn't I move the box? Why didn't I take initiative to do something that would make things better for everybody else, right? And so take initiative is one of these behaviors that I think sometimes there are just those things that maybe organizations have always done a certain way, or there's maybe a certain cultural aspect to things, and people see things and maybe they hesitate, maybe they hold back. Taking initiative is one of those behaviors that really do advance our ability to increase pace and quality, I think, in a lot of ways.
The next companion behavior that we find really interesting is that these effective leaders on speed were also those who set stretch goals. And in thinking about stretch goals, I've been struck recently by one of our clients. The CEO of this company set the target that all of the leaders in that organization would go from X to Y on their 360-degree feedback the next time around, they participated. And so it was clearly spelled out for them that we not only want you to think about being a better leader, we're going to hold you to a standard and to a number of improvement. And it was a fairly hefty increase that was being expected. I think that willingness for leaders to kind of set a high bar and communicate their commitment to making it is what, again, enhances leadership speed.
And then this last companion behavior, foster innovation, I think really builds on establishing stretch goals as well. And one of our clients that we've worked with set a very ambitious goal for their technology organization. And what, as I worked with them, what I appreciated the most, the leader of that organization wasn't telling people exactly how to do it, but rather was fostering innovation in that department. And that brought so much energy into that organization.
And you see an organization today like Amazon. I was reading recently that Amazon has like 48.5% of all the online sales.
Wow.
48, nearly half of all online sales, Amazon. What have they done? I mean, they could have kind of rested on their laurels in terms of a very effective business model for distributing books and other merchandise. But the fact that they've kind of developed the Kindle, and then they developed the Echo and these Alexa that talks to you through a speaker. Their ability to just never rest and constantly innovate has really kind of catapulted them to a remarkable level.
So now, where do you focus? We've talked about all of these companion behaviors that are really kind of those behaviors very correlated with leaders that execute leadership speed at a high level. So what does this mean for you? So I'm going to ask you to remember your results or review your results. And you may have had, on your scale, may have indicated that you have a faster pace. You prefer that. If it does, that doesn't mean that, if you prefer a faster pace, you can check the box, you're great at leadership speed. But it does suggest you have a preference for executing fast. If your scale indicated that you had a slower pace, again, that doesn't mean you're terrible at leadership speed, but it does suggest that you have a preference for executing right. And so when you view these companion behaviors, we're going to ask you to pick two. So what are two of these companion behaviors that you could implement, that you could begin to formulate a plan around that would help you increase your leadership speed? And all of these have this very strong correlation with leadership speed, but we've looked, and some do tend to help you execute more towards executing right, and some help you towards executing fast. And so in viewing your personal situation, you may want to choose those that will help you kind of complete your leadership speed formula. We're going to provide you some resources to help you make this decision and get a little bit more information about the companion behaviors. One that's you can download now under handouts and will also be included in our follow-up email is a one-page overview of all of these companion behaviors. Another thing that we're going to make available after this webinar is a leadership speed development guide. And this is something that we're going to make available by request, and it will be delivered to you by a Zenger-Folkman representative. But that will be a high-value document that walks you through a little bit of some exercises around selecting some companion behaviors to work on with a little bit more detail. So as you now think about all of those companion behaviors and as they've been described, what's your initial take? What two companion behaviors do you think would make the most difference for you? So you can see the list there on your screen. Please participate through the poll. What two companion behaviors would make the most difference for you? Now, Jack, I'm going to put you on the spot. Of all of these companion behaviors, I'll let you get away with only choosing one. What companion behavior do you think would make a difference for you personally with your leadership speed?
Well, I think the one on being courageous is one that, for as we look at the future here, I just think it's hard to give up on things you've been doing that have had moderately good success, but that can be the enemy of excellence and the enemy of change. And so I think it's the courageous one for me.
All right. So thank you for participating and choosing a couple companion behaviors. Now, I want to just mention that Jack and Joe Folkman have written a book on speed. And so this really goes into a lot more detail around our research that we've compiled and things you can do to accelerate successful execution. So to get one of these books, though, we're going to give several of these away. You need to complete the survey that pops up when you exit the webinar. So when you close down the webinar today, the survey will pop up, and then we're going to do a drawing to give away several of these books. I also want to give a little pitch here for our webinar next month, and it's what to do about the performance review. And that's really going to overview how management style impacts those important employee conversations. And a lot of talk and a lot of action has been going on with performance reviews, and what do we do with it, and do we keep a rating system, do we throw out a rating system? But one thing that's really common is organizations are tending to start to expect their managers to have more frequent conversations. They want to elevate the level of feedback and coaching. And we want to spend a little bit of time next month talking about that, how a manager's style will impact that, and how we can make that practice even better. So to end, we have this quote from Charles Schultz here: "Life is like a 10-speed bike. Most of us have gears we never use." And our goal today was to provide you some individual insights within this broader context of the research that we've done, and hopefully encouraging you to use some gears that you haven't used yet to increase your leadership speed. We appreciate your participation and attendance today and look forward to working with you in the future.